we had different understanding as far as
They changed hip-hop forever, but their breakup didn't come with a diss track or a fistfight. Instead, Eric B., Rakim's empire collapsed in silence, shattered not by music, but by contracts, betrayal, and business gone wrong. And the truth behind why Rakim walked away? It's darker, stranger, and more personal than anyone expected. To understand why Rakim eventually walked away from Eric B., we have to rewind to the mid-1980s, when hip-hop itself was still being written into history. New York was alive with raw creativity. Graffiti on subway cars, DJs as neighborhood stars, and block parties fueling a cultural movement. Rap wasn't yet an industry, it was survival, expression, and hustle. Eric Barrier, better known as Eric B., was already making his mark in the Queens DJ circuit. More than just technical skill, he had an aura, confidence, connections, and the foresight to know image mattered just as much as music. He wasn't just spinning records, he was setting the stage for something bigger. Meanwhile, William Griffin Jr. was living a quieter life in Wyandanch, Long Island. Reserved and contemplative, he didn't project the brash energy of other MCs. Instead, his power came from precision. When he rhymed, it wasn't loud, it was fluid, calculated, hypnotic. Once he picked up the mic, he transformed into Rakim, the man who would be crowned the God MC. Their meeting through Marley Marl's network felt destined. Eric B. needed an MC who could match his ambition. Rakim needed a stage for his gift. In a 2012 Complex Oral History, Eric B. remembered their first encounter. Rakim came to my house, we sat down, and he rhymed. I told him, that's it. This is the group right here. From the start, Rakim was rewriting the rules. His rhymes, layered with internal wordplay and spiritual undertones, weren't just songs, they were poetry. Eric B. recognized the genius and supplied the hustle, image, and beats to carry it to the world. Together, they didn't just collaborate, they shifted hip-hop's DNA. What Run DMC had done for energy, Eric B., Rakim did for depth and artistry. Their rise was more than music, it was the beginning of a movement. But as history shows, even the greatest partnerships come with cracks beneath the surface. When Paid in Full dropped in 1987, hip-hop changed forever. To grasp its impact, you have to remember the rap landscape then. Simple rhyme schemes, predictable cadences, and party anthems dominating the scene. It was raw, but not yet refined.
Bad business is we split every dollar 50-50, so how could, and we had an accountant by the name of Burt Bedell from day one.
Rakim shattered that template. His flow was jazz in motion, cool, complex, improvisational. Instead of rapping on the beat, he danced around it, weaving words with the precision of a saxophone solo. Critics compared him to John Coltrane, and it wasn't hyperbole. Rakim had brought musical sophistication into hip-hop, forcing every MC after him to rethink their craft. Eric B's role was just as critical. His ear for samples created beats that felt massive and layered, pulling from funk, R&B, and James Brown. Beyond sound, he understood presentation. The gold chains, Dapper Dan jackets, and commanding photos weren't just style, they were branding before hip-hop had the word for it. Together, they projected an image of dominance. The album was stacked with blueprints. Eric B. is President, I Ain't No Joke, and of course the title track, Paid in Full. Minimalist yet futuristic, its sound felt timeless. One fan summed it up decades later on Reddit. Rakim's flow made everyone else rewrite their rhymes. You couldn't come the same after him. Critics agreed. The Source named it one of the greatest rap albums ever. Rolling Stone ranked it among the 500 greatest albums of all time. More importantly, its influence was seismic. Nas, Jay-Z, and Eminem all pointed to Rakim as the MC who raised the bar, while Eric B. modeled how hip-hop could extend into fashion, branding, and business. But here's the irony. The qualities that made Paid in Full legendary, the lyrical genius of Rakim and the entrepreneurial edge of Eric B., would also create friction. As the years passed, those strengths began pulling them in opposite directions. By the late 80s and into the early 90s, Eric B., Rakim weren't just stars, they were icons, living symbols of a genre reinventing itself in real time. Hip-hop was still young, still raw, still proving it could outlast the dismissals of critics who called it a fad. And then came Eric B. Rakim, rewriting the rules with every record. Their catalog Paid in Full, 1987, Follow the Leader, 1988, Let the Rhythm Hit 'Em, 1990, and Don't Sweat the Technique, 1992, wasn't just a run of albums. It was a cultural blueprint. Each release didn't just raise the bar, it shifted the entire game. Follow the Leader especially showcased Rakim's evolution. On the title track, his rhymes were puzzles, riddled with layered metaphors and coded wisdom. His flow wasn't just rhythm, it was mathematics. A perfectly calculated sequence where each syllable landed with surgical precision. Critics called it science in motion. And then there was Microphone Fiend, a generational anthem. For decades, aspiring MCs would dissect that track line by line, trying to unlock Rakim's formula. He wasn't rapping for the moment, he was building something timeless. Yet Rakim's brilliance didn't exist in isolation. Eric B's presence was the framing device, the scaffolding that held the masterpiece. His beats, his scratches, his ear for what complemented Rakim's delivery, they created the sonic canvas. Eric B wasn't trying to outshine Rakim. He was curating him, almost like a museum curator presenting priceless art. And beyond the music, Eric B was a strategist. In the MTV-driven late 80s, image mattered as much as sound. Eric B understood this instinctively. The Dapper Dan jackets, the thick gold ropes, the regal swagger, they weren't just fashion choices. They were declarations. Eric B, Rakim weren't hustlers making it out of the neighborhood. They were kings claiming their crown. For fans, this was a revelation. Rap could be more than survival. It could be prestige, sophistication, power. The ripple effect was immediate and lasting. Nas would later confess that Paid in Full changed everything for him. Eminem called Rakim the MC who unlocked the door to complex rhyme schemes. Jay-Z described him as the blueprint for technical lyricism. Chuck D of Public Enemy declared Rakim the most advanced MC in the game. These weren't casual compliments. They were acknowledgments from the very architects of modern hip-hop that Rakim had redefined what was possible. But behind the celebration lingered questions. Was Eric B simply riding shotgun to Rakim's genius? Or was his business hustle the reason Rakim's genius even reached the world? Fans and insiders debated it then, and the debate still rages in hip-hop forums today. Some insist Rakim alone carried the duo's brilliance. Others argue Eric B's entrepreneurial instincts, his push for image, branding, and control were just as essential. That tension between lyricism and business, between artistry and branding, wasn't just their private struggle. It mirrored the crossroads hip-hop itself faced as it moved from block parties into boardroom. On stage, Eric B, Rakim looked flawless. But offstage, cracks were forming, cracks that hinted at the split that would break fans' hearts. On stage, Eric B. Rakim appeared untouchable statues of confidence draped in gold, spitting verses that felt eternal. But behind the image, their bond was eroding under the weight of business, money, and control. Rakim struggled most with the industry. In his memoir Sweat the Technique, he admitted how suffocating it felt to balance art with label demands. For him, rap was sacred, mathematical, and spiritual. But labels push for singles, radio hits, and quick turnarounds. You start to feel like your art isn't fully yours anymore, he said. And though Eric B wasn't the enemy, his role as the business mind often made him look like part of that system. Money added more friction. Reports pointed to disputes over royalties and ownership of masters. The late 80s industry was infamous for murky contracts, and Eric B. Rakim weren't immune. Friendship and partnership blurred with business, creating resentment that fans never saw. Speculation grew. Was this about personal beef, or was Rakim simply exhausted by the system? To some, Eric B represented the machinery holding Rakim back. To others, Rakim's discontent looked like a betrayal of the man who had elevated him. The truth was, murkier creative frustration and financial battles collided until separation felt inevitable. After Don't Sweat the Technique in 1992, the split came. Lawsuits followed, centered on contracts and masters. These weren't minor disputes, they went straight to the heart of hip-hop's biggest question: who really owns the art? For years, silence replaced collaboration. Rakim pursued solo work but never recaptured the same dominance. Eric B leaned further into business and later even politics. The breakup became more than a footnote. It was a cautionary tale. Even the most legendary partnerships can fracture when ambition, money, and vision clash. Yet the fallout wasn't purely bitterness. Rakim continued to credit Eric B's role in shaping their image, and Eric B repeatedly acknowledged the magic they made together. What was lost wasn't love, it was sustainability. Fans are still left wondering, did Rakim leave Eric B, or did he leave the industry? Was Eric B the problem, or simply a symbol of it? The truth sits in the gray. What's certain is that when the cracks split open, hip-hop lost one of its greatest duos, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any beat. Just when it seemed like Eric B. Rakim were untouchable, the cracks didn't show in the music, they showed in the paperwork. Their downfall wasn't fueled by bruised egos or lyrical battles, but by contracts, control, and the kind of ambition that can turn allies into adversaries. Rakim broke it down years later in a 2018 NPR interview. The plan had been straightforward. Each man would get a solo album under their deal. Eric B. went first, and Rakim signed off without hesitation. But when it was Rakim's turn, the tables flipped. Long story short, Rakim explained, Eric B. did his solo album, I signed off, and when it was my turn, he didn't want to sign off. What sounded like dry legal language was, to Rakim, nothing short of betrayal. He carried the sting of that decision for decades. What made it even more bitter was the backdrop. The duo was already entangled in complicated disputes with MCA and Island Records. Questions swirled about masters, royalties, and ownership rights. Lawyers circled, labels maneuvered, and suddenly the art that had once felt effortless was buried under contracts and clauses. For Rakim, who had built his name on transcending the ordinary, the grind of legal battles was suffocating. To him, this wasn't just business, it was personal. Eric B., on the other hand, has always maintained that his decisions were about protecting their brand and navigating a cutthroat industry. In his mind, paperwork wasn't betrayal, it was survival. But to Rakim, it felt like his partner didn't trust him, or worse, was standing in the way of his growth. And when trust is gone, even the strongest partnership begins to unravel. Despite the turmoil, their relationship never descended into public mudslinging. There were no diss tracks, no dramatic blow-ups in the press. Rakim himself would later emphasize, "We never swung at each other. We had a business problem." But sometimes, business problems cut deeper than fists ever could. Silence became their weapon of choice, and that silence eventually became permanent. Their final joint project, Don't Sweat the Technique, 1992, unintentionally became their curtain call. At the time, fans saw it as another chapter in an unshakable legacy. Only later would its title feel ironic because while the music remained flawless, the bond holding the duo together was already fraying. Behind every intricate rhyme and polished beat, there was a partnership quietly dissolving. For fans, the breakup was confusing. How could two men who looked like brothers, who had changed the very language of hip-hop, simply drift apart without a fight? The answer was as simple as it was painful. Sometimes the enemy isn't on stage, it's in the contract. And that's how it ended. Not with microphones dropped in anger, not with diss records echoing through the airwaves, but with silence. A silence that left fans longing for what could have been, and a legacy forever colored by what was lost. After the breakup, the silence was loud. Eric B. tried his hand at a solo career, releasing an album in 1995 through his own 95 Street label. But without Rakim's voice, the project barely made ripples. The magic of Eric B.'s beats seemed incomplete without the lyrical alchemy that had defined them. Rakim's path was different. He teased fans with Heat It Up in 1993, but it wasn't until the 18th letter, 1997, that he made his real mark as a solo artist. The album went gold, proving that Rakim still had the respect and attention of the culture. Yet even with strong sales, critics and fans couldn't help but measure it against the towering legacy of Eric B. Rakim. In 2000, he signed to Dr. Dre's Aftermath, a move that had fans buzzing. An album called Oh My God was in the works, and the thought of Dre's production paired with Rakim's precision was electrifying. But it wasn't meant to be. Dre wanted the raw edge of gangsta rap, while Rakim leaned toward spiritual, thought-provoking rhymes. Neither man would compromise, and by 2003, Rakim walked away. The project never saw daylight, leaving fans with only rumors of what could have been. Rakim eventually resurfaced with The Seventh Seal in 2009, a deeply spiritual work rooted in numerology and rebirth, a clear statement that he was seeking renewal on his own terms. It wasn't about topping charts anymore. It was about legacy, philosophy, and artistry. Eric B., ever the hustler, chose quieter routes. He dabbled in film appearances, stayed active in music behind the scenes, and lived off the weight of the legacy they'd already built. Though less visible than Rakim, his role as the foundation of one of hip-hop's greatest duos remained undeniable. When Eric B. Rakim parted ways, it wasn't just a breakup, it was heartbreak for an entire generation of hip-hop lovers. Fans didn't just notice, they mourned. On Reddit, one user captured the sentiment perfectly. Rakim, KRS, and Kane completely flipped hip-hop on its head. Paid in full was monumental in changing hip-hop from party music to poetry. That wasn't an exaggeration. Before Rakim, MCs often stuck to simple rhyme patterns. After Rakim, lyricism became a competition of intellect. Another fan wrote, "Without this album, you probably wouldn't have Nas or Jay-Z. Rakim changed everything." And in many ways, that's true. Nas himself admitted that Rakim was a blueprint, the MC who showed him that rap could be storytelling layered with meaning. Even decades later, that heartbreak hasn't healed. On TikTok, users make edits of their classic videos, captioning them with, "When Rakim walked away, hip-hop lost something and never got back." YouTube comment sections are filled with nostalgia people recalling where they were the first time they heard Eric B. is president, or how Follow the Leader made them rethink what rap could be. On X, formerly Twitter, threads still pop up with lines like, "The one that got away," or "What if Rakim and Eric B had one more run?" What makes this fan grief so unique is that it transcends generations. Teenagers in 2025 who weren't even born during the duo's prime are still discovering Paid in Full and reacting with awe. They feel the loss as if it just happened, proof that the music is truly timeless. It's not just about nostalgia, it's about witnessing the foundation of modern rap, then realizing the architects walked away before finishing the building. For fans, it wasn't just the end of a duo, it was the closing of a chapter in hip-hop that still feels unfinished. The breakup of Eric B. Rakim didn't exist in isolation, it was part of a bigger, familiar story in the music industry. Hip-hop history is littered with duos and groups that buckled under the weight of business deals, ego clashes, and the constant push and pull between art and commerce. Run DMC, pioneers in their own right, faced heavy label pressure in the late 80s that pushed them in directions that didn't always align with their vision. Pete Rock, CL Smooth, whose soulful beats and introspective lyrics defined an era, famously fractured over creative control, leaving fans longing for the chemistry they never got back. Even Outkast, one of the most celebrated duos in rap history, split temporarily into solo projects when artistic differences called for space. In Rakim's case, he described in a 2013 conversation that he often wrote in the studio, letting the beat dictate his flow. To him, rap was more than music, it was spiritual science, a way to decode the world through rhyme. But as he put it, the business side boxed him in. Label decisions, legal wrangling over masters, and the lack of autonomy over his solo vision created tension he couldn't ignore. Where Eric B. may have seen protection of interests, Rakim felt betrayal of trust. This is the classic tension in music. When one partner leans business, the other leans art. When contracts start dictating creativity, even the strongest bond can strain. Eric B. Rakim's split mirrors a universal truth that goes beyond hip-hop. Artists often struggle when their pursuit of expression collides with the machinery of the industry, and when that struggle happens in a duo, the weight of credit, control, and compensation can magnify every disagreement. Their separation was more than just a business rift. It was another cautionary tale of how groundbreaking art can be derailed by the very system meant to elevate it. Here's the haunting question that still lingers like an echo. What if Eric B., Rakim had stayed together? Their legacy is unquestionable. Paid in Full remains one of the most celebrated albums in hip-hop history. In 2025, You Discover Music praised Rakim's lyrical scientist approach, complex rhyme schemes, seamless internal rhymes, and a flow so smooth it felt like jazz improvisation. He wasn't just rapping, he was constructing architecture with words. That blueprint didn't just inspire, it set the bar. Nas, Jay-Z, Eminem, and countless others built careers on doors Rakim kicked open. Cliff's Notes and other retrospectives highlight how Paid in Full captured the socioeconomic anxieties of the late 80s. It was poetry from the streets, giving voice to disenfranchised youth in a way rap hadn't fully done before. Rakim's lyrics spoke about hustling, spirituality, and the daily grind, with a sophistication that forced critics to finally acknowledge rap as serious art. And with Eric B's beats sample-heavy, groove-driven, unapologetically raw, the combination was alchemy. But then comes the what if. Fans still imagine alternate timelines, tweets like blue lights. What if Eric B. Rakim never split? Get thousands of likes, because the longing is universal. If they had continued, could they have rivaled the dominance of Jay-Z in the 2000s? Could they have evolved into something even more avant-garde, blending Rakim's spirituality with Eric B's streetwise production? We'll never know. Instead, what we have is a legacy frozen in amber. The duo gave the world a brief, brilliant run, then walked away, leaving both fans and fellow artists with equal parts admiration and heartbreak. Maybe that's why the story resonates so much, because it reminds us that genius, no matter how pure, is fragile. And sometimes the greatest what if is also what keeps the legacy eternal. Despite years of silence, the narrative took a hopeful turn. In 2016, Eric B. announced via Twitter that he and Rakim had reunited and were set to tour. 25 years later, their first show back together? Apollo Theater, July 7, 2017. It was more than nostalgia, it was healing. Their shared history and mutual respect finally overcame mistrust. Eric B. said it best, "We started out as kids. I can go not talking to my brother for a year or two, and he's still my brother." Rakim echoed that sentiment. It wasn't personal. The business went bad. Their performance at Stone Pony in Asbury Park drew praise from New Jersey's governor. In a world of fleeting fame and fractured alliances, they had come full circle, two legends reunited, stronger for the scars. And here's the kicker, they walked away from each other when it felt like hip-hop stood still beneath their feet and returned decades later to remind us that legacy doesn't wear out, it waits. Now, I have to know, what's your theory? Did business pressures really break them? Or was there something more personal in play? Drop your thoughts down below. Because believe it or not, this reunion is just one chapter. And if this story left you shook, trust me, the deeper you dig, the more you'll find. Stick around. The final twist might just be what flips the entire tale.